people think about vulnerability as like, I'm sharing my deep, dark secrets. No, it can be dreaming bigger, wanting more, asking for something. It can be not shelving that thing that's been nagging at you and you just don't believe in. It's like, it's not just the bad shit that happened in your life and the safe space to share that. Our dreams sometimes are as risky as our demons.
Hi there and welcome to Messages from the Body, where Rebel Black is guided by myself, Kelly Vanyai, to channel messages from her body that help us to have shifts and awareness that improve our life. We often talk about topics of a sensitive nature, so if you do happen to find yourself feeling triggered, we've included a list of helpful numbers for you below. But for now, sit back, relax, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Messages from the Body. A very timely message.
Yeah.
Connecting the head and the heart.
And
very interesting because I've just come off the back of a course where we learn all about where the blockages in the spine literally are and why people are in their thinking mind, overthinking.
Yep.
When we have that blockage between them, the heart can't do its job of choosing and guiding and directing because we're trying to do the job of the heart and the head at the same time, all from the head. And it's obviously we've gotten to a point that you've described where that's going to be too much for what's coming ahead, that we need both to be playing their own roles.
Yeah. Surrendering of the control. Yeah. And I think the struggle for people will come in the level of requirement for vulnerability. I think it's like, there's vulnerability and then there's what's required vulnerability. And I think I would want to encourage everybody to really, dig deep into where have they convinced themselves, where in their mind have they convinced themselves that they're being vulnerable when they're actually, there's another layer and there's some more depth that they could achieve if there was a willingness to do that. And there needs to be a willingness to do that.
Where have you seen an example of the block between the heart and the head happening in business around you? Have you got any real life examples that you can speak to of problems you're seeing happening that could be solved if people were being more led by their heart?
Yeah, I think what I see is that it's an either or. There's still this belief that it's either or. You're either a heart-centered leader or you're a pragmatic leader. And I think that plays into some of the masculine, feminine, the divide between the masculine and feminine, the need for humans to, we say divide and conquer, but when I use the word conquer in that context, I mean understand. It's like, in order for us to understand, we need boxes, we need to put things in boxes. It's a part of the way the brain operates, but that actually is sort of out of control now. And so there's this, we've been raised in the narrative that we have to choose. You can't be a spirit, a heart-centered leader and a pragmatic leader. You've got to choose. You can't be masculine or you have to choose whether you're a masculine leader or a feminine leader. And I think that narrative keeps us separated and disconnected as individuals and within the context then of the collective as well. It's like you would choose a side. I'm like, I don't want to choose a side. I'm both. And at different times I'll draw on either of those things, maybe to a greater degree, but not to the cost of the other in the fullest extent. So yes, there are times at which you have to make pragmatic decisions, but when it's done through the heart, because there's an open channel, there's an open communication, then it's not experienced as an aberration or, some overt masculinization or some dictatorial command. It's like, okay, yeah, now we're getting pragmatic. We've got to get pragmatic here. There is stuff to get done. Or equally where it's required, we just have to move out of the pragmatism and go to humanity. And we've got to, for the moment, put a pin in it, all of the numbers and the rules and the structure and everything, and just be open about this and enter into some vulnerable conversations that then allow the guidance, again, in dialogue with the mind through the heart, that says we can find common ground here. We can find a page, some place where we can all meet that may require compromise, but not out of integrity for anyone. It's like, but no one will feel they've compromised because they've sat in the safe space of the heart. But there's also pragmatic stuff to get done, and so I think it's where businesses are struggling. I can't think of a specific example. One isn't coming to mind easily, but it's like what I see is this struggle between trying to get, an example that I was watching and listening this morning in a group was the example of culture, and the way that a good culture in business these days, the standard at which that is held is Google, right? Like everyone's like, Google's the master of culture because they've got slippery dips and sleeping dens and food and, and so, and on one hand, I get that. On the other hand, I was like, well, but those can be mirrors for an insidious, extractive environment where we're convincing people that this is good culture simply by creating playthings, giving them playthings. That's good leadership to some degree if you know and understand the team that you're working with, and I'm absolutely not criticizing the way. It's when that way is applied out of context through a head-centered lens, and people go, right, well, the way to fix our business is to get fake grass and ping pong tables and sleeping pods, instead of actually the way to fix our business is to move into a vulnerable conversation, a human dialogue that brings to the table in equal value and equal measure the head and the heart. And then, put in the ping pong tables and put in the sleeping pods, because that's what is required. Or you may realize none of those things land, and then you take different strategies, for engagement or whatever the tactics are that are then applied. And that requires considerable risk for everybody. High degrees of vulnerability come with great degrees of risk. And so I think that, I love Brene Brown's work in vulnerability. I think if anyone's realizing that that's something they need to, muscle up on, that it's a skill that they're not yet flexing well with and that they need to kind of get good at, then I saw her, it's like the gateway drug, Brene Brown's work for that stuff. And she articulates it so beautifully, and she articulates it from the collective, it's research based. And so I think that's she's been calling out that work for a long time. And I really am, through this channeling, sensing the urgency of that. It's like, don't just heed it as lip service. You're going to have to live this.
I love how you talk about it like a muscle. Like if you're not flexing that muscle yet, it really is like a muscle. You got to practice it to get good at it, just like going to the gym.
Yeah, because it requires risk in the same way that, getting stronger in a muscle requires the risk of, tension and breakage and the discomfort that comes from overstretching and all of the things that most people in some way, shape or form have experienced at some point in their life. The physical form being extended, this is the emotional body being extended. Vulnerability has risk. There's absolutely zero doubt about that. And so getting clear on what those risks are, and then what journey you're going to take in terms of doing that incrementally, which I highly recommend, much more so than the cold turkey approach of like, right, I'm going to live my whole life in vulnerability, here I am, warts and all. The blowback from that can be quite fierce, and then put people off doing it again. A bit the same as like, right, I'm going to go to the gym, and you do the heaviest, hardest weights that you possibly can, and you do all of the things, and then you end up with some physical hangover and you've torn muscles and you never go back to the gym. That's like, let's not do that.
Well, it seems like with both of those examples, there's appropriate sharing and appropriate gym exercise and inappropriate as well. So you can have appropriate vulnerability and inappropriate vulnerability. So it's almost like, is that why we have to get started now? Because it does take training to learn like how much to share, when I'm not sharing enough, and all of that stuff when I'm maybe sharing too much.
I think that I'm just looking for, I wrote a new Venn diagram, big fan of Venn diagrams lately, around this idea earlier in the week. And it was clarity at the center comes from capability, context, and something else. I can't remember the third C off the top of my head, and it's not in a book. It's on my computer. But the context matters. Understanding your own context, understanding your own capability at this point. It's like, well, what's a step, just one step further beyond where you are right now? It's not to your leading edge. It's just to an edge, and knowing your own capability, knowing your context, will give you the clarity to then know what the actions are that you need to take in order to expand your capacity to submit control or to submit to vulnerability.
When I started doing that, I think it was like noticing the moments where I could have actually shared a little bit more. I could have been a little bit more open.
Yep.
And then starting, okay, next time I'm going to be in that space a little bit more. If I feel like, oh, I could share that with this person, maybe give it a go. And then I started to learn a little bit that way. Are there any particular steps that you recommend for people who are like, what to notice for, what kind of little signals and signs to notice for? Is there anything like that coming through?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is where it feels uncomfortable, then you know you're at some sort of stretched edge, and where you don't want to do it, and parts of you are like, no, we don't need to do that. We don't want to do that. Don't go to the gym. Don't, then you're possibly onto something. But the other thing that people will do in this is armor up. And the way that we armor up is get a new course, it's like look to the outside. And so even some of the vulnerability, like highly recommend getting support around you, coaches, experts, whatever the advice pathway is. But be mindful that could also be your avoidance of vulnerability. And that sometimes you've just got to sit in your own, sit on your own, in your own stuff, and do the grit work, the grunt work on your own. And so not always, but sometimes I think we think we're moving towards more vulnerability by stretching ourselves to do another piece of study or do another piece of work, when in actual fact, sometimes it is an avoidance tactic of the ego, because it distracts you. It's like, because now you're learning a new skill, new something, but not the skill of vulnerability. Now you're learning another skill.
It's sort of like the distinction between the busyness of learning more and the actual being of open.
Exactly. So, and again, it's, it's learning yourself so well that you can find that, or having a confidant in your life that will just call that on you and be like, no, that's an avoidance tactic right now. So having someone in your life that can do that's really important.
You talked about the risk before, and about, the risks that go along with doing a new skill or going to the gym, and like being sort of aware of, okay, there's safety. Once I know that, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, now I can do it safely. But then also the flip side of that, what are the risks of people not doing this? If they don't do the work and they don't start to go into vulnerability, what are the risks there?
Well, look, the status quo will continue. And some might argue that that's not a bad thing, because it's safe and secure, even if it's not brilliant. So it depends on people's appetite for what's on the other side of that. And
What is on the other side of that?
Not this, it's what you decide it to be. I don't know. Everyone talks about this sort of great shift in humanity, but no one can tell you what it actually is. And the reason for that is that we are the co-creators of that. And so what's on the other side of that is a life heart. The risk is you live your life unfulfilled. And if you're okay with that, awesome. If you're not, do the work. And the dreams you dream in the space of vulnerability, because people think about vulnerability as like, I'm sharing my deep, dark secrets. No, it can be dreaming bigger, wanting more, asking for something. It can be not shelving that thing that's been nagging at you and you just don't believe in. It's like, it's not just the bad shit that happened in your life and the safe space to share that. Our dreams sometimes are as risky as our demons. And so in the sharing process, so I think the risk of not really embracing vulnerability, not really submission, moving into this submission, realizing you're not in control, entering into a new conversation between your head and your heart and leading through the heart in this, harmonious, balanced way, is you never do the work to realize the fullness of your life, and therefore whatever this great shift in humanity is doesn't happen. Status quo remains. Like, who knows what's possible in the next 20 to 50 years? But if the dreamers aren't dreaming it, none of it will be. And we are all the dreamers.
Yeah, the vulnerability of stop playing small and stop believing we're not capable of greatness. All these layers that people get to step into as their greatness and be their full potential are on the other side of vulnerability. And
it's even afraid of being regretful will keep you not vulnerable, because you're like, oh, well, I don't want to regret anything, so we do it all, rather than being discerning and only choosing one path, which might be the more vulnerable thing to do than doing everything. I definitely get that sense for myself at times.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, where I love having this full and rich life, but actually the more vulnerable pathway would be just to choose one. Terrifying. So, and for other people, it's the opposite. They're like, but I've stuck in this one path, but there's some nagging thing calling them like, do more, do more. There is no one way of being vulnerable. And so again, it's like, if we're afraid to live our life with no regrets. In fact, I actually wrote a blog about this recently, the difference between, I think we've been getting what we think regret is wrong, actually. So if you go to the website and look through my musings, through the blog post that I do, there'll be one there on regret. Yeah, so the blog post is, what if you are feeling guilty about the wrong things and should be living a life of regret? There's a page turner. It sort of speaks to it speaks to what we've been coming through, or what's come through today. So yeah.
Beautiful. So if anyone's listening and they want to check that out, they can find that on www.rebelblack.com and then go to her blog page. Amazing. What a great session, and some good reframes there, and some real stuff to not just sit and contemplate this time, but actually a call for action to get moving, because it sounds like we've got some work to do to get ready for bringing this heart-centered way of living, the connected way of living, I should say, heart and head together, not separate anymore.
Yep, absolutely. It's the way, the new way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Rebel, and thank you for your body sending all these beautiful messages through.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Kel.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was the last episode in this series for Messages from the Body, and we really hope that you enjoyed it and took a lot from it. If you would love to continue listening to Rebel and engaging in her content, or perhaps to even work with her, you can check out all of the links below, follow her on her socials, as she always has something interesting and new coming out. I'm sure there will be other interesting podcast series coming up soon from the whispers that I've heard, so stay tuned for that, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the future.